If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I was buried in the dust of a university archive, that my life's most profound discovery would have nothing to do with forgotten architecture, I would have scoffed. I would have adjusted my glasses, turned a brittle page, and retreated further into the silent, predictable comfort of the past. The past was safe. It was static cataloged, its dramas long since cooled into footnotes and faded ink. My life was built on that safety. A fortress of routine. Morning coffee, same mug. Afternoon research, same chair. Evenings with books that asked nothing of me but my attention. I was a historian of lonely places, and in turn, I had become one myself. Then I was sent to the Umber Peaks, a jagged spine of mountains that cared little for history and even less for the comforts of a man like me. My grant demanded it. Weeks of field work to verify the existence of pre-colonial aqueducts whispered about in local lore, but absent from any official map. It was a task that required a guide. The university liaison, a cheerful woman named Clara, had been emphatic. "You need Julian," she'd said over a crackling phone line. "No one knows those mountains better. A bit of a monolith, but he's the best. The only one I'd trust to get you in and out a monolith." The word echoed as I saw him for the first time. He was leaning against a battered pickup truck outside the town's only general store, arms crossed over a chest that seemed as broad as the truck's hood. He was tall, built of something denser than other men, all hard lines and quiet presence. Sun-weathered skin, dark hair cut short and practical, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the local granite. He didn't smile. He just watched me approach, his eyes a difficult, unreadable shade of gray, like a storm gathering over the peaks he supposedly knew so well. My hand felt small and damp as I offered it. "Leo," I said, my voice thinner than I'd intended. His hand engulfed mine. It wasn't a handshake. It was a geological event. Calloused, warm, and utterly impersonal. "Julian, one word." His voice was a low rumble, the sound of stones shifting deep underground. And that was it. That was the beginning of the distance. He was the guide. I was the client. He was the body, the physical fact of survival in this wilderness. I was the mind, the extraneous academic with his delicate maps and useless theories. The hierarchy was clear from the moment he threw my meticulously packed duffel into the back of his truck as if it weighed nothing. He moved with an economy I found both admirable and intimidating. No wasted steps, no hesitation. He was a man in constant, silent conversation with the world around him, a language I did not speak. And I was just noise. My fumbling with my water bottle, my nervous questions about the trail, the very sound of my city-soft boots on the gravel. I felt like a liability, an irritation he had agreed to tolerate for a fee. His silence was a physical weight. It filled the cab of the truck on the drive to the trailhead, broken only by the crunch of tires and the whine of the engine. I tried to fill it, of course. It's what anxious people do. We abhor a vacuum. I prattled on about the theoretical gradients of the aqueducts, the potential for discovering new construction techniques. He just grunted in response, eyes fixed on the winding dirt road. Each grunt was a perfectly sharpened dart, deflating my sentences, making me feel foolish and academic and utterly out of place. By the time we reached the trailhead, I had given up. I had retreated into the familiar quiet of my own head, where at least my ramblings weren't being judged by a silent mountain of a man. This was the status quo. Him walking 10 paces ahead on the trail, a silent, formidable back. Me following, heart hammering against my ribs from exertion in a different, more complicated kind of anxiety. He was everything I was not. Grounded, confident, physically capable. I watched the muscles in his back shift under his worn shirt as he navigated a fallen log, and a strange, unwelcome heat bloomed in my chest. It was a feeling I had learned long ago to catalog and file away. A dangerous curiosity, a longing for a connection I felt wholly unequipped to forge. So I focused on the rocks, the trees, the mission. I was here for ruins, not for a man. The disruption came on the third day. The sky, which had been a placid, forgettable blue, turned the color of a bruise. Julian stopped mid-stride, tilting his head back to sniff the air like an animal. "Storm," he said. Another single, declarative word. A bad one. We need to get off this ridge. There was a new urgency in his movements. The lazy, powerful grace was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He pointed to a dark smudge on a lower slope. There's an old warden's cabin that way. Might not be much, but it's better than being caught out in this. The wind began to howl, tearing at my jacket, trying to steal the breath from my lungs. Rain followed, not gentle drops, but a cold, violent deluge. The world dissolved into a blur of gray sheets and whipping branches. I slipped. My foot, so carefully placed, slid on a wet rock, and my ankle twisted with a sickening pop. A cry of pain was ripped from my throat, swallowed by the wind. I was on the ground before I even registered falling. Julian was back at my side in an instant. His face, for the first time, showed something other than stoic indifference. Concern. It was a crack in the granite facade. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice sharp over the roar of the storm. I tried to push myself up. A white-hot spike of pain shot from my ankle to my hip, and I collapsed back with a gasp. "No," I managed to say, the word tasting of mud and failure. He didn't sigh. He didn't curse my clumsiness. He simply knelt, turned his back to me, and said, "Get on." I stared at his broad, capable back, the rain plastering his dark shirt to his skin. The thought of being that close, sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm too heavy." "Get on, Leo," he used my name. He had never used my name before. It felt less like a request and more like a command from the storm itself. Awkwardly, painfully, I clambered onto his back, hooking my arms around his neck. His body was a furnace against the icy rain. Solid, unyielding muscle. He grunted softly as he took my weight and then stood as if I were no more than a pack. And then we were moving. My cheek was pressed against his shoulder, my world reduced to the scent of rain, wet earth, and him. A clean, masculine scent of pine and sweat and something uniquely Julian. My glasses were fogged and useless. My injured ankle throbbed in time with my frantic heartbeat. But all I could focus on was the forced intimacy of the moment. My hands, clasped just below his throat, could feel the steady, powerful beat of his pulse. My legs were wrapped around his waist, my thighs pressed against his. This was proximity beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was a crucible burning away the comfortable distance I had so carefully maintained. The cabin was barely more than a shed. One room, a stone fireplace, and 2 dusty cots. But it was dry. Julian lowered me onto one of the cots with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his sheer strength. My entire body ached with a strange combination of pain and awareness. He moved through the small space with purpose, lighting a lantern that cast flickering, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. He stripped off his soaked shirt without a word. My breath caught in my throat. His back was a landscape of muscle and old scars. A long, pale line ran from his shoulder blade down to his waist, a story I couldn't read. Other, smaller marks dotted his skin like faint constellations. This was a man who had lived, who had been hurt. The monolith had cracks. He turned, and for a moment, I forgot to look away. His chest was broad, dusted with dark hair that tapered down over a flat, hard stomach. He wasn't looking at me. He was focused on the task of building a fire, his movements efficient and sure. I felt like a voyeur, my gaze a trespass. I quickly looked down at my throbbing ankle, my face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the fledgling fire. He came over to me, kneeling on the floor. The lantern light carved deep shadows under his cheekbones, made his gray eyes gleam. "Let me see," he said, his voice low and calm. His hands, those large, calloused hands, were surprisingly gentle as he worked my boot off. I hissed in pain as the leather scraped against my swollen ankle. "Sorry," he murmured. His fingers probed the tender flesh, and an electric current shot up my leg. It wasn't just pain. It was his touch. Intentional. Clinical, yes, but it was still his hands on my skin. My skin. The shock of it was a physical blow. My heart felt like a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. My stomach was a swarm of bees. This is ridiculous. He's just checking for a break. But my body didn't care about logic. It cared about the warmth of his thumb brushing against my arch, the pressure of his fingers mapping the geography of my pain. "Doesn't feel broken," he announced, his voice pulling me from my daze. "Bad sprain, though. You'll be off it for a few days. Trapped. Here. With him." The thought was a cocktail of panic and a dizzying, terrifying hope. He found a faded medical kit under the other cot and began to wrap my ankle with a practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done this many times before. As he worked, I found my voice. "The scar on your back," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What's it from?" His hand stilled for a fraction of a second. He didn't look up. "A disagreement with a mountain lion," he said, his tone flat. He resumed wrapping the bandage. "A mountain lion? Of course. My most dramatic injury was tripping over a loose rock. His was fighting a predator. The chasm between our lives felt wider than ever. And the others?" I pressed, emboldened by some strange, storm-induced recklessness. He finished his work, securing the bandage with a piece of tape. He finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting mine in the flickering light. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thick, charged. "Life," he said simply. And in that one word, I heard a novel's worth of stories he would never tell. I saw the weariness I'd missed before, a deep-seated exhaustion that lived behind the stoic mask. He wasn't a monolith. He was a fortress, and I was suddenly, desperately curious about what he was protecting. The storm raged on for 2 days. We were confined to the small cabin, a world unto ourselves. The professional hierarchy dissolved, eroded by shared space and forced inaction. I was no longer the client. I was the patient. This subtle shift changed everything. He was the one bringing me water, helping me hobble to the door, checking the bandage on my ankle. I was the one in a position of need, and he met that need with a quiet, unassuming competence that was profoundly affecting. In turn, my own area of expertise found an unexpected use. Tucked away on a dusty shelf was an old, leather-bound journal, left behind by the cabin's original warden. The ink was faded, the handwriting an archaic, looping script that was nearly illegible. Julian had pulled it down, his large fingers looking clumsy against the delicate pages. "Never been able to make much of this," he'd admitted, a rare confession of limitation. He handed it to me, and suddenly the playing field was level. Here, in my hands, was a language he did not speak. I spent hours deciphering the warden's entries, my pain forgotten as I fell into the familiar rhythm of historical detective work. I would read passages aloud, my voice filling the quiet space between us. The journal wasn't just a record of weather patterns and animal sightings. It was the lonely, poetic account of a man's life in isolation. His fears of the winter, his wonder at the spring thaw, his grief over a wife lost years before. Julian would sit by the fire, sharpening a knife or mending a tear in his jacket, but I knew he was listening. I could feel his attention on me, a focused stillness that was more potent than any words. Sometimes I would look up and find him watching me, his expression unguarded, a flicker of something soft and curious in his eyes. In those moments, my heart would stumble. I am reading another man's story, but he is seeing mine. On the second night, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and the rain softened to a gentle patter on the roof. A profound silence descended, deeper and more intimate than the roar that had preceded it. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm, sleepy light on the room. I had finished the journal. The last entry was a simple, heartbreaking line. "The silence is a cold companion, but a companion nonetheless." I closed the book, the weight of the warden's solitude settling in my own chest. He was lonely, I said quietly. Julian was sitting on the edge of the other cot, his back to me. For a long moment, he didn't respond. I thought perhaps he hadn't heard me. Then he spoke, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Some people are." He turned his head, and his eyes found mine across the small, shadowed space. The air crackled. The careful boundaries we had constructed, the roles of guide and client, patient and caregiver, they all evaporated in that single weighted gaze. There were only 2 men in a room. Two solitudes, suddenly and acutely aware of each other. "You talk a lot," he said, but there was no bite to it. It was just an observation. A fact. My face flushed. "I know. I get nervous." "What are you nervous of, Leo?" he asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. The question hung in the air between us. What was I nervous of? Everything. This. Him. The terrifying, unspoken thing that was pulsing in the quiet room. The truth came out, a quiet, shameful confession. Of silence, a small, sad smile touched his lips. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines, revealing a surprising vulnerability. "I'm the opposite," he said. "Silence is the only thing that makes sense most of the time." He stood up. My heart leaped into my throat. He crossed a few feet between our cots in two long, silent strides. He stood over me, a massive silhouette against the dying fire. I had to crane my neck to look up at him. I felt small, fragile, exposed. He didn't say anything. He just lowered himself down, not sitting beside me, but kneeling on the floor in front of me, so that our eyes were level. The gesture was one of deference, of service. It shattered my perception of him completely. His big, rough hand came up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to touch my face. My entire body braced for it. Instead, his fingers gently brushed against the cover of the old journal in my lap. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. For giving him a voice, my throat was too tight to speak. I could only nod. His hand lingered on the book, his knuckles brushing against my thigh. A firework of sensation exploded from that simple, accidental point of contact. It was too much. It was not enough. He must have felt me tremble, because he slowly drew his hand back. Dash. But his eyes never left mine. They were searching, questioning, and in them, I saw a reflection of my own desperate longing, my own profound loneliness. "Julian," I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. That was all it took. He leaned in, slow, hesitant, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the gravity of him. His lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss like in the books I'd read. It was quiet, questioning, incredibly gentle. His lips were chapped from the wind, but warm. It was a kiss that asked, "Is this okay?" And with a soft sigh, I leaned into him, answering yes. His hand came up then, cupping the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. The other hand rested on my knee, his thumb stroking back and forth, a soothing, grounding pressure. The kiss deepened, but it never lost its tentative, exploratory quality. It was a conversation without words, a discovery. The taste of him was wood smoke and rain and something else, something uniquely his. I brought my hands up to his shoulders, feeling the solid, living warmth of him beneath my palms. The world outside the cabin, the mountains, my research, my entire former life, it all ceased to exist. There was only the flickering firelight, the soft sound of our breathing, and the overwhelming reality of Julian. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His breath was warm on my skin. "Leo," he breathed out, and my name sounded different in his mouth. It sounded like a discovery, like a secret, like a beginning. I fell asleep in my own cot, but the last thing I remember is Julian's hand on my arm, a silent promise that he was still there. I awoke to sunlight, bright, clear, unapologetic sunlight, streaming through the cabin's single dirty window. The storm was over. The air was scrubbed clean, and through the window, I could see a world washed in vibrant greens and blues. For a moment, a blissful, hazy moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Then memory rushed back in. The kiss, his hands, the raw vulnerability in his eyes. My heart gave a hopeful little flutter. Then I looked at the other cot. It was empty, neatly made, the blanket folded with military precision. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in my stomach. I pushed myself up, my ankle protesting with a dull throb. The cabin was silent. The fire was dead, a pile of gray ash in the hearth. Julian was gone. His pack was gone. His jacket was gone. The only evidence he had been here at all was the neatly wrapped bandage on my ankle and a canteen of fresh water left on the small table beside my cot. He'd left. He had woken up in the clear light of day, seen the mistake he'd made, and fled. The shame was a physical thing. It burned behind my eyes, tightened my chest until I could barely breathe. Of course he left. What did I expect? I was a broken-down academic, a temporary complication in his life. Last night was a fluke, a moment of shared loneliness brought on by the storm, a flicker of intimacy in the dark that couldn't survive the harsh light of morning. I was a fool, a hopeful, romantic fool. I sank back onto the cot, the silence of the cabin no longer intimate, but mocking. It was the same silence that had always been my companion, but now it was different. Now it was filled with his absence. Every shadow seemed to hold the shape of him. Every creak of the old wood sounded like his footstep. My solitude, once a comfortable fortress, now felt like a prison. He had breached the walls, shown me a glimpse of something else, and then vanished, leaving me more alone than I had been before. The self-recrimination began, a vicious, well-practiced internal monologue. I pushed him. I misread everything. I saw longing where there was only pity or a momentary lapse in judgment. He was just being kind to the injured client. The kiss meant nothing. The thought was a sharp, twisting knife. I spent the day in a miserable haze, my anxiety a relentless hum beneath my skin. I drank the water he left. I ate the protein bar he'd placed beside it. Each act felt like an acceptance of his pity, a final confirmation of my place in this story. I was the footnote. He was the adventure. By late afternoon, I was convinced he wasn't coming back. He'd probably gone to get help, to find some other ranger to haul his pathetic, broken client off the mountain, so he could be done with the whole embarrassing episode. The idea of seeing him again in the company of others was mortifying. The polite, professional distance would be back, thicker and more unbearable than before, reinforced by the memory of what had passed between us. I would have to pretend it never happened. We both would. The thought was unbearable. I was staring out the window, watching the shadows lengthen, resigning myself to another long, lonely night when I saw him. A figure, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. My heart stopped. It was him. He wasn't moving with his usual confident stride. He was walking slowly, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He looked hesitant. He stopped at the tree line, just looking at the cabin, as if trying to work up the courage to approach. The monolith looked uncertain. He carried something in his hand, a small bundle of herbs? Leaves? My mind, my anxious, overthinking mind, was a whirlwind of confusion. He was back. Why was he back? He took a deep breath, a visible expansion of his chest, even from this distance, and then he walked into the clearing and up to the cabin door. The door creaked open. He stood there, framed in the doorway, the late afternoon sun at his back. He looked tired. He looked vulnerable. His gray eyes found mine, and they were filled with an apology. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet. I couldn't speak. I just stared, my heart a painful, hopeful drum against my ribs. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him, plunging the room back into shadow. He held up the bundle he was carrying. "Comfort," he said. "It's good for sprains. Reduces the swelling." He had spent the day searching for a medicinal herb. For me. He hadn't run away. He had gone to help. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, it felt like I might shatter. "I thought you left," I whispered, the words raw and accusing. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He walked over and sat on the edge of his cot, the space between us a canyon of misunderstanding. "I'm not good at this," he said, looking at his own hands, turning the herbs over and over. "At what?" "This." He gestured vaguely at the space between us. "Talking. The morning after, the morning after." He named it. He acknowledged it. It was real. "I woke up," he continued, his voice low and strained, "and the storm was gone. And I panicked." He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I'm used to being alone, Leo. It's safer. I don't let people in. I don't know how the fortress." He was showing me the gate. "Last night," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Last night felt important. and that scared the hell out of me. So I did what I always do. I ran. I found an excuse, a task, to put some distance between us. To think my own fear, my own anxiety, began to recede, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost knocked me over. He was just as scared as I was. The strong, silent man was terrified. "What did you think about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That I was an idiot," he said, a wry, self-deprecating twist to his lips. That running away from something that felt right was the most cowardly thing I've ever done. And I've run from a mountain lion. A small, watery laugh escaped me. He stood up and came to me, kneeling on the floor again, just as he had the night before. He took my hand, his calloused palm engulfing mine, linking our fingers together. His touch was no longer a question. It was a statement. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this is new territory for me. It's uncharted. I have maps," I said softly. A real, genuine smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes, making them shine. "I know you do," he said. Will you help me navigate it?" This was his confession, not one of passion, but of fear, of hope. It was more honest and more intimate than any kiss. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in days. "Yes." He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. A promise, a recommitment. Later that evening, as he crushed the comfort leaves to make a poultice for my ankle, he pulled a small, worn object from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was a key, an old, simple brass key. "My cabin," he said, not looking at me, his focus entirely on his task. "Down in the valley. It's not much." He looked up, his gaze direct and unwavering. "But it's quiet. And the company is better than I'm used to. If you want to stay." After we get off this mountain, he was offering me a key to his home, to his fortress. It wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a tangible, real, terrifyingly wonderful offer of a future. My heart, that frantic, trapped bird, finally settled. It had found a place to land. "I would like that," I said. And just like that, the world shifted on its axis. The next morning, we woke up together. Not in the same bed, not yet, but in the same small room, the space between our cots no longer a chasm, but a comfortable, shared territory. He was already awake, watching the fire he'd built. He turned when he heard me stir, and the smile he gave me was soft and easy, a morning smile. It felt like a miracle. There was no anxiety, no fear, just a quiet, settled peace. He made coffee, strong and black, in a small pot over the flames. He handed me a mug, our fingers brushing. The touch was electric, but it was a familiar current now, a hum of connection, not a jolt of panic. We sat in a comfortable silence, sipping our coffee, watching the dawn break over the mountains. His silence no longer felt like a judgment. It felt like a shared language, a space we could both inhabit without the need for nervous chatter. My former life, the one in the archives, surrounded by the dust of other people's stories, felt a million miles away. A different lifetime. I had come to these mountains seeking the dead, the remnants of a forgotten past. Instead, I had found the living. I had found him. I had found a part of myself I didn't even know was missing. The journey back down the mountain a few days later was slow, dictated by the pace of my still healing ankle. But I didn't mind. Julian walked beside me now, not 10 paces ahead. His hand was always there, ready to steady me over a patch of loose rock. Sometimes our hands would brush, and he wouldn't pull away. Sometimes he would let his fingers linger, a brief, reassuring pressure that spoke volumes. His cabin was just as he described it. Small, simple, built by his own 2 hands. It smelled of cedar and wood smoke in him. It felt like coming home. In the months that followed, we built a new routine, a shared one. I finished my research, my notes filled not just with observations about aqueducts, but with sketches of the way the light fell across Julian's face as he read by the fire. He would go out on day trips, guiding other clients, and I would feel a pang of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy, followed by the warm, secure knowledge that he would be coming back. He always came back. Our evenings were quiet. We would eat dinner together, sharing stories of our day. I learned about his life, the losses that had taught him to build walls, the quiet joys he found in the wilderness. He learned about mine, the books that shaped me, the academic world I had used as a shield. We were two vastly different men from two vastly different worlds, but in the quiet space of that cabin, we found common ground. We found a shared language in the space between words. One night, months after the storm, we were lying in his bed, the moonlight painting silver stripes across the floor. His arm was a warm, heavy weight around me, his breath steady against the back of my neck. "You know," I said into the quiet darkness, "I came here to study ruins." I felt him smile against my hair. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I thought about my old life, my fortress of solitude, the carefully constructed walls I had mistaken for safety. They were ruins in their own way. And this man, this quiet, solid, impossibly gentle man, had walked through them, seen the damage, and decided to stay. He hadn't fixed me. He had simply moved in and helped me build something new, something stronger, something shared. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that saved me from a half-lived life. He was the silence I was no longer afraid of. "No," I said, turning in his arms to face him to see the soft glow of the moon in his eyes. "I found something so much better."